At its very core, drug science must remain independent. This means we don't accept sponsorships. It's with the support of the drug science community we're able to do this and make the podcast in the first place. If you're able to become a drug science community member and support the show, you too will be supporting the dissemination of evidence-based drug policies. Without you, none of this would be possible. For anybody interested, there's a link in the show notes. Thank you. Hello and welcome to the Drug Science Podcast with me, David Nutt. Here we're bringing together experts and activists for a rational, honest and informed conversation about drugs. Well, hello everyone and welcome to another Drug Science Podcast with me, David Nutt. And those of you who are regular listeners will have heard dozens of podcasts talking about the science of psychedelics and the pharmacology of psychedelics and the history of psychedelics. But tonight's podcast is the first where we really delve deeply into the psychology and the psychotherapy of psychedelics. Because I have with me today what I think are the two leading UK experts in how to use psychedelics therapeutically. And we're going to have a conversation about their experiences. They're going to share their wisdoms and hopefully help us plot a path to where these drugs become standard practice in the treatment of a range of different disorders of the mind. So welcome, Laurie Higbed, and welcome, Owain Winfield. They're old friends. We've worked together now for longer than they probably care to remember. And it's great to have you on the programme.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you. Thanks for having us, David. It's great to be here.
So, Laurie, I'll start with you because I think you are uniquely trained. Is that right? You are, as far as I know, the only person who's been properly trained, or at least trained at all, whatever that properly means, in MDMA, psilocybin and ketamine therapy. Is that correct?
To be honest, I'm not sure if I'm the one and only.
Well, the only one I know anyway.
There might be some other psychotherapists out there, perhaps in the States for sure. But yeah, absolute privilege to be able to train in those modalities. So I have worked with MDMA, trained with MAPS to become an MDMA-assisted psychotherapist and worked on a clinical trial using MDMA-assisted psychotherapy as a relapse prevention treatment for people experiencing alcohol use disorder. I trained with Compass Pathways to be a lead therapist in the psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression study, and then worked for Awaken Life Sciences, where we developed our protocol and our manual for developing ketamine-assisted psychotherapy to treat a range of mental health difficulties, and was lucky enough to work alongside Owain in that role.
Yeah, he tells me that you taught him all he knows. Is that right, Owain?
I would see it slightly differently. I think we work as a great team. Owain certainly brings huge amounts of innovation to this field, to our work, and has certainly got me thinking in different ways about how we use ketamine as an adjunct to psychotherapy. So yeah, I would definitely say Owain has taught me much of what I've learned about ketamine work along the way too.
Thank you, Laurie. It was really kind, very kind.
So, Owain, tell us a bit about yourself. How did you get into this field?
Well, I'm first and foremost, I'd say I'm a psychotherapist. Like my undergraduate degree was psychology, and I moved straight into being a therapist and worked for quite a long time in the NHS. In some listeners might know, but in what we know as IAP services. So I've worked in that setting for a long time, just as a jobbing. Not just as, but as a jobbing psychotherapist, seeing a lot of people in the NHS. And I had a couple of jobs as a research therapist, and I've been following the sort of psychedelic stuff and reading your things, David, and kind of following things. And I ended up with a couple of research jobs, which put me in Exeter University and working alongside Celia Morgan. And then when Awaken first kind of was created, this job came up, which allowed me to work with Laurie. So to date, most of my experience has been ketamine based. I'm also Compass trained, so psilocybin trained as well. But my kind of main interest really is in ketamine. I think it's a very accessible drug that could be used more than it is. So.
We'll come back to your, what I think are innovative and actually progressive and sensible views on how to use ketamine in a minute. But I think it's also worth saying to people that although the Awaken set up 2 clinics, ketamine clinic in Bristol, which is near where Laurie lives, and also in London, they didn't work. Eventually, they had to be closed down because the costs couldn't be covered. But we carry on. Owain, maybe say a little bit about what you're currently doing with us.
I'm still with Awaken. So when we had to close the clinic, it was a huge loss. I think everyone worked there really felt it, and we had done, I think, some really amazing work, and I'd seen quite a few people there, and had some amazing results with people who were kind of otherwise treatment resistant. And Laurie was sort of saying that, we worked together there and kind of came up with loads of cool ideas about ways to kind of tweak ketamine assisted work to get better results with people, and it was really a sort of enjoyable period. And but then so we lost the clinics, and it was sad, but Awaken kind of continues, and so we're currently looking at bringing to market oral thin film, like an S-ketamine product, which will hopefully simplify the use of S-ketamine and make it more accessible to a lot of people. And we've got some other drugs coming as well. I don't know how much we'd like to talk about that, David.
The care study has now gone into the more care, and there's this multi-center.
Yeah, so all the care stuff continues. I have some involvement in that. When I was in the clinic, we were sort of trying to use, we were taking the stuff from the research and converting it into something that we could use with paying clients in the clinic. And so we were able to use stuff that was at phase 2B in trials in a clinical setting and see good results with that. So that research at Exeter University continues with Professor Celia Morgan.
And you've been operationalizing essentially the therapy, is that all right?
Yeah, that's what me and, it was mostly me in Bristol, but Laurie helped me with that as well, didn't you, Laurie?
Yeah, and it was so exciting, as you were saying, Owain, to be able to actually see something come out of a clinical trial, a therapy model, something so innovative that worked and was effective, and be able to bring that into a clinical setting really quite quickly as well. That was such a thrill, because we often read papers where we think, oh, that sounds like a great idea, or I'm interested in that innovation or that kind of therapeutic work. And there we were able to bring it to life, and just made a few adaptations, but we were pretty true to the protocol, I'd say. And then we were able to treat clients with something that it was fresh, hot off the press.
It was great. It was really exciting. Like I feel like it took quite a long time, because I lost myself to it for about 3 months, didn't I? I kind of just buried myself in kind of going over and over and rewriting things, and it was only a couple of months or so, and we had something that we were actually seeing clients with, and getting really good results. Like I remember our first ever care client in the clinic. It's a very specific manualized approach using 3 ketamine doses. In research, the doses were 0.8 milligram per kilo intravenous. We opted to use intramuscular injections in the clinic because there was a few logistical things around anaesthetists and things that just made it easier. So we went with IM injection. So we used 1 milligram per kilo in the clinic for that. So but there was a very manualized, mindfulness-based CBT relapse prevention intervention that goes with it. So we wrote these. We created these manuals that clients could work through in the run-up to treatment, and then during treatment they had manuals that went with each dose and each week of treatment. So the whole thing was really structured, and the idea is that the structure means it can be scaled and replicated. So we started that in Bristol, and then took it to London, and then we also had you didn't mention the clinics in Norway, David.
Yes, tell people about those.
Yeah, so we had this Oslo and Trondheim clinics as well, and they still exist under a different company now, but I trained the guys out there as well. So we had this care intervention kind of went Bristol, London, Norway, and we did partner with clinics all around the world, actually. Like, so I did training for people in the States and in Canada and in Portugal, and so we tried to push it all out as far as we could.
It's still being used? Well, obviously, the principles are underpinning quite a lot of what is being done with the certainly with psychedelics as well. Because I know, Laurie, you're kind of giving mentoring to our team at Imperial, aren't you, with their ongoing stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I have got most of my experience as a clinical psychologist is in addictions broadly and substance misuse specifically. So I'm supporting, supervising the Imperial team that are looking at how we might use psychedelic assisted psychotherapy to support people who are struggling with substance misuse disorders. So yeah, excited to be involved in that work as well, because it's an area that really, needs innovation. These disorders, substance misuse disorders, do tend to be, relapsing conditions. So yeah, looking forward to see what we can do with that area of research.
And that's a psilocybin trial, although other places people are using ketamine too. So maybe, Laurie, talk us through what a session is. I mean, or how you prepare, what a session's like, and how you do the support afterwards, so people can fully understand what we're talking about when we're talking about psychedelic psychotherapy.
Yeah, so I can speak to that broadly, because certainly the way that I've worked with MDMA, with ketamine and with psilocybin have followed the same kind of pattern, which is that we offer preparation sessions, then we have our drug sessions or experiential sessions, and then really importantly we have integration sessions. So all the studies and clinical work I've been involved in, I think it's fair to say, have involved those three kind of key therapeutic interventions. So the preparation part, of course, is so crucial, so that people feel safe when they take the medicine in that drug assisted session. That is our utmost priority, that it is a safe setting and that people feel really contained and supported by us as therapists. So we're making sure that people have an appropriate mindset going into the experience, and they are in an environment that feels that, it's usually that mix between feeling, yes, it's clinical enough that if they need a bit of support, or, we have medical staff on hand if needed as well. So there's that multidisciplinary approach, but it's also comfortable and relaxing at the same time. And, the therapist is really underpinning that setting going into the experience.
Yeah, I was going to say that the most important thing is safety, isn't it? It's like people need to feel psychologically safe and socially safe, and it's the therapist, but it's the whole team as well. And I think that was some of the feedback we got about from the Bristol clients, was just how well the whole team managed to create this sense of safety and hold people. It's psychedelics are potentially really challenging. People can find them quite difficult, and they need to know that they're going to be okay, and that we're there for them. And so you need to communicate that in the whole system, really, somehow.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So that's the preparation, and then mostly the actual day of the drug administration is. Most people don't probably understand what goes on there. So who wants to talk about that?
So the preparation phase is like everything that runs up to prior to, really. And like Laurie said, you're trying to create a sense of safety. The person needs to feel confident enough that they're held by the team and by the therapist. So, I mean, some of the clinical trials will have an hour of preparation or a couple of hours of preparation. To define it like that, I mean, my personal hunch is that preparation, you can't really measure it. It's more about getting someone to a point where they feel safe and there's a good rationale for why you're doing this treatment. So you've done all that preparation period, and then they come in for the dosing day, and or the dosing session. With ketamine, generally dosings are around 2 hours long. Usually with an IM injection, people will be kind of acutely affected for around an hour. So if you have a 2 hour window to do that in, you're trying to dose people in the first 15 or 20 minutes of that time. So you might spend 15 or 20 minutes just settling people. We usually use a bed or some sort of recliner. So people are reclined and comfortable. We spend 15 to 20 minutes settling people down, trying to maybe revisit a couple of the concepts that you might have talked about in therapy to bring them to mind, so that they're kind of held in a useful mindset before going into the experience. We use things like weighted blankets to give people a sense of being cocooned and held, blackout eye masks to try and sort of usually noise cancelling or over-ear headphones that just limit external stimulation. So we're trying to create comfort, physical comfort, and cocoon people in a way that limits external stimuli, so that the trip itself is of their own content. So you're sort of setting this sort of safe, calm situation, tucking people in, administering the drug, and then people are off. And ketamine's quite it's in higher doses, it's an anesthetic and a dissociative anesthetic. So the experience for most people are lying quite still. There's not a lot to see as a therapist. Occasionally people will interact or need us in some way. So after about 50 minutes with a intramuscular injection, people will start returning to the room, and then we have a small amount of time at the end, another sort of maybe 45 minutes or so to start sort of debriefing and integrating the experience.
But that's quite different. I mean, so MDMA, I think the MDMA sessions that you were working through, Laurie, were 6 to 7, weren't they? I mean, that's and silent night, it's 6 hours or so, yes.
That's right. Yeah, they're quite different, David. That's true. So psilocybin and ketamine, perhaps there is some similarity there in terms of, as a therapist, we are mainly being that supportive presence and caretaking if needed. And it's an opportunity to collect experiences, as we say, that we'll then discuss typically in the integration. With MDMA, I guess, it's got those different subjective effects. So people can feel that there's a positive mood, but also at the same time, they might be experiencing something quite challenging. But so with MDMA, we do spend some time in the drug-assisted session where we are talking with the participants, because they feel able to do that. They're not quite so disconnected from their environment. And so as therapists, and you usually work in a co-therapy pair with MDMA, in fact, always work in a co-therapy pair, partly because you're there for 6 hours. So that needs to be held by 2 people. And people, are often talking, I would say, it can vary, but roughly 50% of the time, perhaps. And we are, as therapists, we're sometimes making suggestions or inviting people to focus on certain areas. But that drug session is still very much client-led, so led by that participant, and the therapist is going to follow and just support an inward-focused experience. So there might be a role for the therapist to spot if there is some avoidance showing up, for example. So in an MDMA assisted session, we might find that a participant who is talking quite a bit to us, we might be making some suggestions that they spend a little bit more time inside with the medicine to really focus on that internal experience and what's showing up.
Yeah, I think this is so important that people understand that this therapy, if we can call it in a general sense, psychedelic therapy, isn't about engaging during the trip. It's about using the trip to do things. I mean, how would you describe that? How do you describe it to one of your clients? Owen? What is the purpose of the trip? Why are we going through all this at all?
Well, I think with ketamine, there's a couple of different strengths to using it. So we get this kind of, the trip itself is part of it, but it's not all of it. We have most people will experience this kind of antidepressant effect. So generally people tend to feel pretty good like a couple of days afterwards, and they can and along with that there's this sort of psychological or sort of neuroplasticity and psychological flexibility that comes with it. For people can have a window of that for maybe up to a week or so afterwards. So it's not, so the trip itself isn't the entire kind of value of the drug. The antidepressant effects and the flexibility it gives people allow people to kind of just think a bit more creatively afterwards and engage in things that they might not have otherwise engaged in. So it makes, as a therapist, if you're using kind of principles of acceptance and commitment therapy, the idea of kind of unhooking from strong emotions just suddenly feels a lot more accessible to people.
You mean they can do it?
Yeah, they can do it. Yeah, so people just, we sort of jokingly talk about ketamine as being mindfulness in a bottle. It gives people this just this little bit of distance from strong emotions, or this ability to kind of let go of strong emotions. So whereas previously someone with like addiction issues might feel very drawn by strong feelings and like pulled into it in a way that the only way of managing it is to drink or use other substances or something. Suddenly people have this, they can feel the same thing, they can feel pulled by the same emotions, but it doesn't hold them in the same way. They can kind of go like, I choose to do something different. So that's like the kind of after effect of a ketamine experience. That the trip itself, like we try not to kind of oversell the trip because people experience it really, really differently. And it's actually it can be quite counterproductive to have people, read media reports of mind-blowing, incredible trips, because not everyone's going to have that. So the experience that one person has, it just says nothing about the experience that another person can have. So whatever the experience is, it's going to be your own experience, and it will carry some meaning for you, but it's very varied. So we kind of try and prepare people for not knowing, really, for the unexpected.
There's this wonderful quote, Laurie, isn't there, from one of the vets, the MAPS vets, who was part of the one of their ecstasy trials. After sort of 7 hours of going through whatever the trauma was he had, I think it was a military trauma, he came out purportedly saying, I don't know why they call this ecstasy, because it's actually very hard work. I mean, dealing with trauma, dealing with negative thoughts for that period of time is actually quite challenging.
Yeah, very. And I think thinking about MDMA specifically, again, one of the huge benefits of it is it dampening down that amygdala response, ideally so that people become more able to think about their trauma and therefore process it and think about it in new, more helpful ways. So we're helping them to manage that fear response, but a fear response is often still activated. It's just more tolerable, and a way that the participant feels they're able to regulate, sometimes with support from the therapy team, just stay within that, as we call it in trauma therapy, that window of tolerance. That's really important. That means you can stay with it long enough to process it effectively. But yeah, it isn't necessarily all a fun trip. It can be challenging.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the prejudice against these therapies are that people just think, well, they're just getting high. But actually, they're not getting high, they're getting therapy. Owen?
I don't, I hear people say things like that, and I have sort of I have issue with that a little bit. I kind of think if someone's been feeling utterly awful for a really, really long time, and if we're defining getting high as feeling better and feeling more open and flexible and being able to enjoy things, then, is it really a bad thing to be giving people an opportunity to feel those things and experience those things?
Well, I think it's important we actually accept that people can feel better during the trip. And one of the examples I like to use, one of the sort of analogies I like to use, is that during certainly the psilocybin experiences, people can see that they can be different. I mean, okay, they might say there's a knowledge that you could feel different is very empowering, isn't it?
I think there's a place, if you look at some of the sort of tailored music that people are putting together for psychedelic psychotherapy, you can use music, and you can use the stuff that you do in preparation to really influence people's experiences in potentially quite a targeted way. And I think in sort of clinical trial settings, you want things to be quite formulaic and controlled, but in private work where you can individualize things, it's possible to kind of almost give people the trip they need. So not completely, but you can manipulate some variables to change the experience. So, for example, I have a client recently who, needed to experience some freedom and joy, and had felt a bit of that through therapy, and had felt this kind of window opening up of like, I can feel freedom. And So just for one of the ketamine sessions, we just focused on that, and we chose music that was going to enhance that, and had this incredibly open experience and this incredible ketamine experience, which and he bounced out the other side of it going like, right, this is great. I feel free and I feel good. And it was kind of, it's what that client needed at that point.
That makes me think of a ketamine-assisted psychotherapy session I had when I was working with a lady. It was her third session, I think. So that's 3 of the 4 that we offer within the protocol. So she was reasonably used to what the ketamine felt like. And she said, "Laurie, this is just amazing. I wish you could be in this experience with me right now," and then reached out for my hand, and I was sort of saying, "I'm here, I'm with you." And some people do have a real kind of blissful, joyful experience,
and that, I think that's wonderful. Like we're talking about people that just haven't felt happy. They just haven't felt happy for a really long time.
Yeah, that's a good point you make. So there is obviously the general, you could base that generally. Why should people be irritated that people who use these drugs recreationally have fun? I mean, there's a sort of cynical view that, hostility to kids having fun. But you're quite right. For people who haven't experienced pleasure for fun for maybe decades, why shouldn't they be liberated? Why we should celebrate that rather than think, oh my God, they're going to become addicts.
Therapy doesn't need to be austere and kind of going over just going over kind of challenges all the time. So I think we know that, like, if people are happy and laughing, they're going to think more creatively, more flexibly. So I don't think we should be co-ruminating with our clients. We should be trying to kind of help them feel open in other ways as well.
I heard that term co-rumination before, but thank you. Laurie, you had your hand up.
I was just going to build on what we were saying really about, having these experiences of feeling perhaps emotions that people haven't felt for a long while, and that's taking us back to those 3 key phases of the therapy, the integration being so important to make sure it isn't just this kind of one-off fun experience, but okay, now how do we see if we can make this stick? What are the actionable steps you're going to take to bed some of this learning and insight and new feeling into your daily life? And there is a brilliant quote from Dr. Rosalind Watts, who will have been on your podcast, so clinical psychologist, yes. Who works on Imperial College psilocybin trials. And she talks about the importance of turning the mystical into the pedestrian. And that has really stuck with me. I think she wrote it in a paper, and I was like, right, that is our mission. So, something that feels otherworldly, that certainly can feel very profound during that altered state of consciousness. Let's do the work in these integration sessions, using the client's wisdom and our own therapeutic experience to consider how we can make their lives different going forward, or how they can make their lives different with our support.
And what is remarkable about the experiences I've had working with you too, and seeing the outcomes, and is it with psilocybin it's often usually just 1 session. With ketamine it's 3 or 4. With MDMA it was 2 in the case of the Beamer study. You get these enduring effects, and they have to be because people change the way they think, right?
Yeah, I just want to lead that back to, because Laurie pulled us back to thinking about the 3 phases, which is very helpful. So you were saying about integration being like pulling it all together, and David, you were saying about making this, how do we get enduring change from this? And the difference between just getting someone high and doing something productive that's likely to have an enduring effect is like pulling it together into integration and using the kind of energy and the feeling that can come from feeling better and feeling lighter and open, and turning it into kind of action in their lives, really. So, if you just give someone a drug that makes them feel happy for a moment, and you don't do any therapy and don't make any changes in their life, then they're just going to feel better for a moment, and then it's going to ebb away. But if you're an astute therapist who really wants positive things for their clients, you'll use that kind of feeling better to push them in a direction, or help coax that person in a direction that's going to bring about changes in their life. And it's the changes in their life and the changes in how they see themselves and how they see other people and they'll see the world. Those are the things that will make it stick and turn it into a lasting effect.
And I think specifically with ketamine, that's really relevant. So to my knowledge, the research studies suggest that the effects of the ketamine on its own are short-lived, perhaps a week or two. And so that's where we really think about what is the therapy bringing to the mix, really, because ketamine on its own isn't likely, I think, to bring about longer lasting change. I think, as far as I understand, the evidence around MDMA and psilocybin might be a bit more mixed. We just do seem to combine those in studies with therapy more, whereas ketamine does have some research based around just being used on its own, obviously as the short-acting antidepressant. Perhaps you have therapists on this podcast who might be inclined to say it's the therapeutic element that really seems to help to bed in the changes that perhaps the drug has supported through neuroplasticity.
I think, to be honest, I had virtually no interest in ketamine until I started doing psychedelic research, saw the amazing power of psilocybin and MDMA to produce enduring change when it's used in the way you've described. And then obviously confronted with the legal blocks, became interested in ketamine as an alternative. And then I was horrified to look back. The first modern era publication of ketamine for depression was 1994. That's 30 years ago. And it's only in the last couple of years that people have started using it as you're using it, which is as a psychedelic that can help people change, as opposed to, as you pointed out. I mean, the reality is ketamine given without therapy has an effect that lasts about 3 days. So it's given twice a week, and it can be given twice a week for eternity. I just think that there's such a, it's a wasted, 30 years of wasted opportunity. I'm not seeing the therapeutic value. But now we're still confronted with most of the prescribed ketamine is not being used with therapy, which seems to me such a terrible wasted opportunity.
Yeah, I think it's interesting with ketamine because it does seem to have a history of being used more within a medical only model, and MDMA and psilocybin haven't followed that path. They've been used in conjunction with at least some kind of therapeutic support in most studies. So yeah, it feels like missing a bit of a trick not to combine the power of the two. And then how I think a benefit of that is, if we can, as far as possible, stepping out of a maintenance model where, people, as you were saying, David, have to return for regular ketamine infusions or, top-ups, that we might need to use the drug more sparingly if it's combined with therapy.
Well, we clearly can. I mean, your evidence from clinics is that we can clearly use it more sparingly. And now, the idea that you might keep people sober for 9 months with just 3 ketamine sessions a week apart, that's a staggering development. But the reason I'm raising this is not just that we've missed a trick with ketamine, but we're also now seeing, I want your opinions on this, we're seeing companies developing psychedelic drugs and trying to downplay and to almost pretend that there isn't any need for any therapy because the drug, whether it's DMT or maybe even psilocybin, resets the brain, and so that you don't need to do any work afterwards. And, I'll ask you for your opinions on that, which I suspect I know, but let's hear them.
I think it's probably motivated by other things, isn't it? It's by red tape that you have to get through and trying to justify, to the people at the FDA with how therapy is a useful part of an intervention. It doesn't really compute with the FDA, so they have to kind of, it's far easier to go, it's a standalone drug, and so there's probably that will be a factor. There's also the cost of with the classic psychedelics and with MDMA, the sessions are really long and they're labor intensive, so it's going to be more appealing to commissioners to say it's a standalone drug. So they might be saying those things, but whether it's optimal and whether safety is optimal and the outcomes are optimal is another thing.
Well, quite. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it seems to me bizarre as a psychiatrist, and I guess you would think the same as a psychologist. The idea that you can reset someone's mood. Maybe you could reset their mood or or their attitude to a drug within 30 minutes of giving them a 5-methoxy DMT. I mean, very appealing, but surely there's work to be done subsequently anyway. I mean, being flung into a whole new environment, a new mindset.
I think there's probably a lot more. Well, there is a lot going on there that we don't fully understand, and I think in some cases there's sort of a trauma processing effect that happens with psychedelics that does help people shift something quite fundamentally, and they do feel differently about things afterwards. But that's not all clients and all presentations. It's there's some people where and you can do that with ketamine as well. There's some clients where it's really clear that there's like a history of trauma, and it's really clear how that's presenting. In fact, most clients there's a history, but with some clients that's like the obvious focus. That's the thing you want to focus on, and you can see this kind of enhanced trauma processing effect where people are able to just like leave behind patterns of emotion and behavior that have been driven by past traumas, and they can just leave them behind because the work's been done in the sessions. I mean, that's with therapy as well, but yeah, it's possible with psychedelics to have a dramatic shift in terms of trauma processing in a single session, but it's not everyone. It's not all the time.
I would agree, Owen. I think, significant, profound change is possible in a drug-assisted session, but then, as we often described it in our work in the clinic, in the Awaken clinic, and we would talk about the drug-assisted sessions being the springboard for change, didn't we? So, that this is sort of starting you on a path towards recovery, or perhaps, just helping to accelerate the journey you're already on, and there's more work to be done. So we were very much giving that message that we saw this as part of a great tool in the toolkit to progress mental well-being, but there's more work to be done in terms of maintaining those gains. Yeah, and I think the evidence base is suggesting that to keep those gains or maintain those gains at 9-12 months follow-up, it's about more talking, maybe not more substances, but more talking therapies.
Or I think we'll probably see more nuanced approaches like coming as all this stuff develops. Like, I know that in my own work, like I sort of treat people with my private work, I treat people sort of case by case, and and there's some people that have started this journey with what looks like a kind of research protocol, like 3 doses and a certain amount of preparation and integration. But actually, we've gone on to have kind of a longer-term therapeutic relationship where I've seen them through. I'm thinking of one of my alcohol clients now. The person with long-term drink issues, who, like, she's in her 60s, so she had drink problems for a really long time, and she was sort of we springboarded her into sobriety with basically the care protocol. It didn't obviously didn't fully resolve some of the underlying emotional issues that drove her drinking. So over time, it crept back in a bit, but she was sober for a really long time. Like, it was really amazing. And then some of it crept back in, and then the drinking, maybe some minor lapses happened, and we've had a couple of ketamine boosters. So if you look at that case, it's like this. She's only had, I think, probably about 7 or 8 ketamine infusions now, and a fair bit of therapy, but she's been sober, apart from a handful of days of lapses. She's been sober for 3 years, which is the longest period of her life. It's absolutely mind-blowing,
And that's hugely cost-effective. So this argument that therapy is expensive, I mean, I guess you psychologists have been fighting that criticism all your life. But, I mean, you may be more cost-effective now with drug-assisted therapy than you were before. I mean, I guess you guys would agree to that because you're doing it, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The amount that you could save the NHS in the long run with a, recovered patient with alcohol use disorder, that it sells itself. But yeah, I think what Owen's talking about there in terms of these really individualized protocols, if you like, or, where you are able to work on a case by case basis, I think for me, that is that's the sort of ultimate way in which we can work. That hasn't always been easy to deliver, obviously within research protocols for clear reasons, but even in clinical work, being able to be truly flexible in terms of the number of sessions we offer within preparation, those that are drug assisted and in integration, it really is kind of the beauty of the work to be able to really respond to the individual based on that shared formulation and understanding of their difficulties and their needs. And yeah, great to hear that, Owain, you've been able to do that and work with clients in that way.
There's more interest. So I'm working with some guys at Imperial and Kyle Greenway at the moment from Montreal, and we're trying to do, we are setting up a pilot with NHS clients for treatment-resistant depression. And that's happening, but we will have to use like a kind of a model that can be scaled and replicated. But that will be like I think a starting point for mass adoption. And then further down the line, hopefully it'll become a bit more nuanced as these approaches become accepted. And we'll see the kind of more individualized approaches taking hold.
Let me just say, because I wanted to finish on this question of rollout into the NHS. And what we've started to think through at Imperial, which you guys are helping with, is the idea, rather than have specialist psychedelic therapists like you two are, maybe we can use the therapists who are treating people and not really achieving what they hope for, and bring them in as part of the psychedelic therapy team, maybe as one of the co-therapists during the session, and then allow them to carry on the therapy afterwards. So that therapy is already costed because that's going to go on because it's already, it's going on already. It's not necessarily getting very far, so it's actually not being very cost effective. But maybe the psychedelics can help that. I mean, obviously, you're interested in that model because you're helping us with it. But I want to ask you, as clinical psychologists, do you think the field, your professional field, is ready for this? Are they, is it going to be a hard battle?
Yes and no. I think there's, I've been to a few of these meetings and I've seen, and I was actually just talking to some people prior to this about this, that if you do a talk for NHS staff, NHS psychologists and psychiatrists, most of the room will be super excited and super enthusiastic about what you're doing. And then there'll be some people that just go, horse tranquilizer, no thank you, or something similar along those lines. So there's still resistance there, but I think there's increasing awareness, and you can't deny the data, you can't deny the anecdotes and the kind of the case studies and the people's stories. So there's a growing kind of evidence base and a growing kind of understanding, and I think people is filtering down. So
you're not being vilified then, Laurie. People are still talking to you. Your colleagues are
Yeah, I'd agree with Owain. It's a bit of a mix, and some, I would say most, just are interested, want to know more. It's how Owain and I started. We were thinking, well, we have medications that help some people with their mental well-being. We have our traditional talking therapies that help some people with their mental well-being. There are plenty of people on our caseloads who are not getting better and are not in recovery. So we were looking for something else. And that will be the same for the therapists that we're going to collaborate with, who don't necessarily have those expertise or specialisms yet within the field of psychedelic research. But I think what is really important is that they have experience of working with people who are struggling with these difficulties. That is the key, I think, for a therapist to be well placed to be able to do this work, to have had experience with sitting with clients who are struggling.
There can be no therapist who haven't met that block, I suppose. Is that right, Owain?
Yeah, there's just some unique skills to being psychedelic psychotherapist, but more importantly, like a skilled therapist, any skilled therapist is capable of doing it.
Well, I think that's a very good note on which to end. I mean, clearly you are both very skilled therapists. You're also pioneers, leaders in the field, and we hope you're going to train hundreds, if not thousands, of your colleagues over the next few decades. Because if you don't, we're not going to progress as we should.
We're up for the challenge, David.
Absolutely.
We'll do our best.
Thank you very much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having us, Dave.
Thank you so much.